4 Canadian provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario, have recently taken steps that could potentially lead to the formation of a new country, completely blindsiding Ottawa and the federal government. These provinces have passed legislation asserting their autonomy and right to self-determination in ways never seen before in Canadian history. What exactly are these provinces planning? How has the federal government responded to this unprecedented challenge? And could this actually result in the breakup of Canada as we know it? Let's dive into the details of this developing situation, starting with Alberta's growing separatist movement. Alberta's separatist movement. In the heart of Western Canada, Alberta has become a hotbed for independence talk. Once just whispers among a few unhappy folks, the idea of Alberta breaking away from Canada has grown into a serious movement that's catching attention across the country. Recent polls show something that would have seemed crazy just 10 years ago. Nearly 30% of Albertans now support the idea of becoming their own country. That's almost 1 in 3 people. Another 40% say they're at least willing to think about it. These numbers have shocked politicians in Ottawa who never thought Albertans would seriously consider leaving Canada. Why are so many Albertans upset? It mostly comes down to money and feeling ignored. Alberta sits on huge oil reserves that bring in billions of dollars. Many Albertans believe they send way more money to the federal government than they get back. They watch as their oil money gets distributed to other provinces while their own economy struggles when oil prices drop. The provincial government has started taking real steps toward a possible split. Premier Danielle Smith recently created a special committee to look into what independence might actually look like. They're studying everything from how Alberta could manage its own pension plan to whether the province could create its own police force instead of using the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Last year, the Alberta legislature passed the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which gives the province power to refuse to enforce federal laws they believe harm Alberta's interests. Critics called it the How to Leave Canada Slowly Act, but supporters see it as Alberta finally standing up for itself. Economic complaints top the list of reasons for separatist feelings. When the federal government created stricter environmental rules that made it harder to build new oil pipelines, many Albertans felt their livelihoods were being attacked. The canceled Energy East and Northern Gateway pipelines still anger many people who believe these projects would have created thousands of jobs. There's also a strong feeling that Alberta's 34 seats in Parliament don't give the province enough say in national decisions. With Ontario and Quebec holding most of the political power, Albertans often feel their concerns get pushed aside. Social media has helped the movement grow, with Facebook groups like Alberta Independence Party gathering thousands of members. These online communities share news stories about federal policies they see as unfair to Alberta and organize real-world rallies and meetings. The movement has its own symbols too. The Free Alberta flag, a modified version of Alberta's provincial flag with the Canadian maple leaf removed, now appears on bumper stickers and t-shirts across the province. If Alberta were to become independent, it would be a wealthy nation with the world's 3rd largest oil reserves. But it would face huge challenges too, like negotiating trade deals and figuring out how to get its oil to international markets without access to Canada's coastline. For now, the provincial government is preparing for a possible referendum on independence within the next 5 years, depending on how relations with Ottawa develop. Whatever happens, it's clear that Alberta's separatist movement has moved from the fringe to the mainstream of provincial politics. But Alberta and its neighbors can't go it alone. British Columbia's strategic position. British Columbia sits in a unique spot in this whole situation. As Canada's gateway to the Pacific Ocean, BC has something the other western provinces really need: access to international shipping routes. Without BC, any new country formed by Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba would be landlocked, making it harder to sell their oil, gas, and farm products to countries across the ocean. BC's premier has been careful with his words. Unlike Alberta's more outspoken leaders, he hasn't directly supported breaking away from Canada. Instead, he's focused on getting better deals for his province while staying part of the country. The business community in Vancouver is split on the idea. Some big companies that do a lot of trade with Asia see benefits in joining forces with the resource-rich provinces next door. One business leader explained, "If we could create policies that work better for Western interests, without all the red tape from Ottawa, maybe we could grow our economy faster." But many others worry about the risks. Tourism is huge in BC, and breaking away from Canada might scare away visitors. Plus, the province has strong ties to Eastern Canada that would be hard to cut. BC's indigenous communities have their own take on the situation. Many First Nations leaders have spoken out against any separation plans, pointing out that their treaties are with the Canadian government. What makes BC really important is its location. If Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba tried to form a new country without BC, they'd have no coastline. They'd have to make deals with either the United States or what remained of Canada to get their products to overseas markets. That's a weak position to be in. Some people think BC might use this situation to get special treatment. By hinting they might join the other western provinces, BC's leaders could pressure Ottawa into giving them more control over natural resources or more money for things like healthcare and education. The province's huge Asian population also creates interesting connections. BC does more business with Pacific countries than any other Canadian province. Some wonder if these international ties might make BC more willing to risk a big change. For now, BC seems to be playing it smart, not committing to either side, but watching closely to see what happens. The Premier recently said, "What's clear is that without BC, any plan for a new Western country faces serious challenges. But with BC's support, the idea becomes much more possible." That's why both Ottawa and the other Western provinces are paying close attention to every word coming from Victoria, BC's capital city. Meanwhile, another key player in the West is making quieter moves. Saskatchewan's involvement. Saskatchewan, often called Canada's breadbasket because of all the wheat it grows, has been quietly thinking about breaking away from Canada too. Unlike its flashier neighbor Alberta, Saskatchewan hasn't been as loud about it, but the feelings are definitely there. Recent polls show that about 1 in 3 Saskatchewan residents would consider leaving Canada. That might not sound like a lot, but it's a big jump from just 5 years ago when hardly anyone talked about it. The province faces some tough problems that make people feel ignored by Ottawa. For starters, farming is super important in Saskatchewan, and many farmers are upset about the carbon tax. They say it makes running their tractors and equipment more expensive, but they don't get enough help to cover these costs. Premier Scott Moe has been speaking up more and more against federal policies. Last year, he introduced the Saskatchewan First Act, which claims the province has the right to control its own natural resources. While he hasn't directly called for separation, he's been using phrases like provincial autonomy and standing up to Ottawa a lot more in his speeches. Saskatchewan's economy depends heavily on agriculture, oil, and potash mining. When federal environmental regulations make these industries harder to run, people get frustrated. Many workers in these fields worry about losing their jobs because of Canada's climate change goals. The province also has a unique history that makes it different from Alberta and BC. Saskatchewan was hit really hard by the Great Depression in the 1930s, and many people there still remember how the federal government's policies back then made things worse, not better. This has created a long-standing distrust of Ottawa that goes back generations. Indigenous communities in Saskatchewan have mixed feelings about separation talk. Some see it as a chance to negotiate better deals for their lands and rights, while others worry about what would happen to existing treaties if Saskatchewan left Canada. Unlike British Columbia, which is looking west to Asia for trade, Saskatchewan is landlocked. This means it would need to work closely with other provinces or the United States to get its products to market. This makes Saskatchewan's separation plans more dependent on what its neighbors decide to do. The province has been building stronger ties with US states like Montana and North Dakota. These connections could become more important if separation ever happened. Saskatchewan officials have been attending more cross-border meetings and signing agreements that don't need Ottawa's approval. Water rights are another big issue. Saskatchewan depends on rivers that flow through multiple provinces, and climate change is making water more scarce. Some people think the province could better manage its water if it didn't have to follow federal rules. While Saskatchewan isn't as wealthy as Alberta, it has been saving money in its own rainy day fund. Some critics believe this could be preparation for more independence down the road. What makes Saskatchewan interesting in this whole separation conversation is that it could be the bridge between Alberta's bold approach and Manitoba's more cautious attitude. Its next moves might determine whether Western separation remains just talk or becomes a serious possibility. Manitoba's role in secession efforts. Manitoba sits at the heart of Canada, and lately, it's been at the center of some big changes too. This prairie province has joined Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia in talks about possibly forming a new country separate from Canada. Manitoba brings some important things to this group of provinces thinking about breaking away. For starters, it has a lot of farmland that grows wheat, canola, and other crops that feed people across North America. The province also has mines that dig up valuable metals and minerals. These resources could help a new country stand on its own feet. Premier Heather Stephenson has been meeting with the other Western premiers to talk about their shared problems. They're upset about Ottawa making rules about oil and gas that hurt their economies. Manitoba doesn't have as much oil as Alberta, but it does have hydroelectric power, lots of it. The dams on Manitoba's rivers create electricity that could power a new nation. Winnipeg, Manitoba's biggest city, would be an important transportation hub for this potential new country. It's where railways and highways connect, making it easier to move goods between provinces and down to the United States. But not everyone in Manitoba supports the idea of leaving Canada. The province has a large Indigenous population who have their own concerns about what separation might mean for their rights and treaties. Many people in Winnipeg especially feel more connected to Eastern Canada than to their Western neighbors. Opinion polls show Manitoba is actually the least supportive of the four Western provinces when it comes to separation. About 27% of Manitobans say they would consider leaving Canada, compared to nearly 40% in Alberta. This makes Manitoba's role complicated. They're part of the talks, but they might be the hardest to convince. Manitoba also has something the other provinces want: access to Hudson Bay through the port of Churchill. This northern seaport could give a new country its own way to ship goods overseas without going through the rest of Canada. The province's economy isn't as strong as Alberta's or British Columbia's, which means Manitoba might need help from its richer neighbors if they formed a new country. Some people worry this could make Manitoba less important when big decisions get made. Manitoba's history makes its role in these talks even more interesting. The province was founded after the Red River Rebellion led by Louis Riel, who fought for the rights of the Métis people. Some separatists point to this history as proof that standing up to Ottawa is part of Manitoba's DNA. Whether Manitoba fully commits to this separation movement could make or break the whole idea. With its central location, the province acts like a bridge between East and West. If Manitoba stays with Canada, it would create a geographical problem for the other Western provinces trying to form their own country. As meetings continue between the four provinces, Manitoba's leaders are carefully weighing what's best for their people. They're asking tough questions about money, resources, and identity that don't have easy answers. The possible breakaway of four Western provinces would shake Canada to its core, creating ripples that would be felt far beyond its borders. Implications for Canada and beyond. If Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, and Manitoba actually formed their own country, Canada would face challenges unlike anything since its founding in 1867. First, let's consider what would happen to Canada itself. Losing these four provinces would cut the country nearly in half geographically. The remaining provinces would be split into two separate pieces, Ontario and eastward in one group, and the Northern Territories as a disconnected region. This would make governing much harder and create a weird-looking map of Canada. Economically, the blow would be massive. The Western provinces control about 40% of Canada's economy, Alberta's oil and gas, British Columbia's ports and timber, Saskatchewan's potash and agriculture, and Manitoba's farming and hydroelectric power would all be gone from Canada's resource pool. Ottawa would lose billions in tax dollars that help pay for things like healthcare and education across the country. The Canadian dollar would likely drop in value, at least for a while. International investors might get nervous about putting money into either the remaining Canada or the new Western nation until things settled down. Both countries would need to renegotiate trade deals with the United States and other nations, which could take years. For everyday Canadians, there would be practical headaches too. Would people need passports to visit family across the new border? What about students who want to attend universities in what would become a different country? Pension plans, health insurance, and driver's licenses would all need to be sorted out. Indigenous communities would face particularly difficult questions. Many First Nations have treaties with the Canadian government, not provincial ones. Their lands sometimes cross provincial borders. Would these agreements still be honored? Who would be responsible for them? These communities might find themselves caught in the middle of a messy political divorce. Looking beyond Canada's borders, the international community would have to decide whether to recognize this new country. The United States States, which shares a long border with the western provinces, would have huge influence here. American leaders would have to balance their close relationship with Canada against the economic opportunities of a new oil-rich neighbor. Other countries with their own separatist movements might be watching closely. If the western provinces successfully broke away, it could encourage similar movements in places like Spain, with Catalonia, or the United Kingdom, with Scotland. For Ottawa, stopping this separation would become the government's #1 priority. Prime Minister Trudeau or whoever leads Canada would likely offer major concessions to keep the country together. This might include giving provinces more control over their resources, changing how tax money is shared, or rewriting parts of the Constitution. The federal government could also try to divide the separatist movement by making special deals with Manitoba, which seems the least committed to leaving. If Manitoba stayed in Canada, the other 3 provinces would have a much harder time forming a viable new country. Whether this separation movement succeeds or fails, it reveals deep cracks in the Canadian Federation that have been growing for decades. The Western province's frustration with Ottawa didn't appear overnight, and it won't disappear easily. Canada's leaders face the difficult task of addressing these concerns while keeping the country in one piece.